I've had a lot of purists, and I use that term loosely, but I've had a lot of purists just beat me up mercilessly about liking people like DJ Shadow and Rival Consoles and people like that. They're like, taking your laptop on stage is not a musician, man.
Are any of these people under 30?
No.
I mean, I had this realization. So I started playing with people in the neighborhood pretty frequently a year or two ago,
You
and
I would love to hear that recorded back.
there's a bunch of it's all over the map, right? So it's a mix of people that are, like, I won't name any of their white collar jobs to protect the guilty, but it's like dentist and and podiatrist, like coming in to play they've got an electric guitar and it's tons of money for the guitar,
Yeah.
and they're like picking it up after a long time as a midlife crisis. And then there's like somebody that had run the radio station I was on a couple years before I was there, just happens to have a kid that's in my kids class, and so she's pretty accomplished as a producer but doesn't play music with other people really. So it was a whole thing to try and get her to come and play out, whereas the other guy, who's like getting into it, he had set a specific goal. He's like, I want to play with other people this year. And another dude, like, he used to tour with a band, good friends with him, but everybody has a completely different style of music that they want to play, totally different levels of skill. Oh, and sorry, I'm forgetting probably one of the most important components of this is the guy that is a literal professional musician and music director at a very large church. So he has he is playing music for money most days, right? And doing production and AV and sound engineering most days for money. And the crew of like ragtag misfits were like, "Oh my god, you're gonna bring a pro here?" I'm like, "I don't know. I mean, we'll see how it goes." And he comes in, and it's like, well, he was like, "I don't play music like this anywhere else. I don't play it in this format. I don't play this style. I don't get to just like sit down and play. It's a completely different experience." And I was like, so you're telling me that after a day of playing music, you want to come here and unwind by playing music?" And he's like, "It's totally different. It's not the same thing at all."
Is it the difference between creation and duplication? I mean, because that's a thing for me in music too.
I mean, it's much more subdivided than that, right? So if he's playing with, I mean, we play inside in the space you're looking at, right? So there's no drum kit in here. We're generally playing after there are kids in bed, but it's like we are playing with electronic drums or a drum track or some odd, bizarre rhythm track. Everything is through the laptop. He is like, we generally are not sitting down with a very strict mission. Like, we don't have to put on a service. We don't have to record an album. It's like, what do you have today to work on? Or what do you want to do tonight? Do you want to play music, or do you want to write music, or do you want to just do tone chasing, or do you want to compare tech, and like which instruments are you messing with? And all that stuff it's kind of different by the day. And this, like, the awakening was, I had exactly the same comment. I'm like, it just feels so corny to take your laptop. Like, say I get I have like a pedal board set up, my amps of choice, and I'm like, man, I could probably consolidate a lot of this stuff if I get a little more comfortable working in a DAW, like in the software. And then I'm like, but then, and I'm not trying to play shows, but I was like, conceptually, why even consolidate all this stuff into the laptop if I'm now tied to the laptop for everything I'm doing? And the pro guy, he looks at me dead in the face like he's confused. And he's like, "You take your laptop with you and then run it through the house sound system." And I was like, "But isn't that lame?" And he's like, "Do you want to carry a bunch of stuff, or do you want to carry a little bit of stuff?" And we, like, the other guy, there's another dude who's a little bit less into the music tech side of things, and he's like, "Yeah, but I want like I want the same sound." And I'm like, you're playing through 1,000 pieces of DSP,
Yeah.
whether it's in a pedal board, in your amp that's, a semi-modern amp, whether it's your mic, whether it's like there's a million pieces of digital signal processing going on here. So saying that I only want to play through old vintage equipment breaks down as soon as you have like non-vintage stuff anywhere in the chain.
Yeah. Once it
So
hit, once
we got
it
past it.
hits a monitor or a speaker, it's been processed.
Yeah. Well, okay. And how about this? Like, do we have an issue with electric guitars?
Right. Yeah.
You can't make the quintessential rock and roll sound without electronics. Like it is exclusively an electronic sound,
Yeah.
unless you're six, and then you can do it like this. Dear.
Yeah. Or you can, there are a number of ways to make noise. I like watching, we've talked about tinkerers this week. I like watching the instrument tinkers who rig up the broom with, you know, elephant twine and something and tune it and then play a great piece on it. Like those
Have you
people
seen
are
the
awesome.
Jack White Coke bottle?
I haven't.
So I mean, I'll describe it like, just imagine Jack White for all the good and bad about Jack White. I don't even know what this was, but it was basically he had a nail, a guitar string, a board, and a Coke bottle. And I guess he had like a piezo pickup or something like that.
Oh, I
And
did see that. That was
yeah,
on the thing with Jimmy Page and Edge.
I probably stopped watching when Jimmy Page and Edge came on. But
Okay.
yeah,
So I think that when the history of the downfall of the West is written at whatever point in the history, Bono's name better be front and center on the reason why. But having said that, I think Edge is one of the most underrated sonic creators on the instrument that there's ever been. You think about the prevalence of delay and, the use of pedal boards today. I mean, would he not have to be considered a pioneer in that respect?
he is. You can say definitively that Edge is a pioneer of delay.
I
Like
mean,
that, like point blank.
like walls. And I saw a thing, and maybe it was something from the Joshua Tree, where he's basically just strumming. I think it's In God's Country, which Joshua Tree is one of the best rock records ever, as much as I hate Bono. And I do hate Bono. I think Joshua Tree is one of the best rock records ever, but Edge is playing like a C chord on there, and it's through his labyrinth of delays, and
Yeah.
it's an amazing sound. It's a fantastic sound.
So I actually don't like most of U2's songs per se, and I also don't like a lot of their guitar parts. So so even though like but then I started as I started getting back into electric guitar, uh, I got very fascinated with reverb and delay. And so most of what I end up playing, like my go-to thing that I will play is some amount of reverb, large amounts of delay. My pedal board had on it, it had two delays, and I would move them around in the chain. So one would be like, at one point I had them right next to each other. At one point I had one at the beginning of the chain and one at the end of the chain. And in all cases, it was sort of like they were up on the desk. So it's, play the guitar, manipulate the delay while you're playing it. And they were both very cheap. Like they weren't fancy or anything. It was just one crummy analog. I mean, they're all like $25 Amazon pedals. So these were like, all of them were an integrated chip inside a pedal, but I had one that was the quote unquote analog delay and one that was quote unquote the digital delay. And the only difference was one would give you slightly more slapback if you turned it like way, way down. So I had those guys and they were set up, and I would basically do like, what is the minimum amount of sound I can put into this delay chain, and then basically play the delay as a sound. And then I had like a compressor after it and a volume pedal at one point so that I could when it starts to screech, you just like turn it back down. And I'm like, I'm not sure this is music, but I'm enjoying it. And
Man,
it sometimes sounds cool.
yeah. So your reverb and delay is my overdrive. Like
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of DHS pedals, a
Yeah.
huge fan. And I've been shamed for this by the purists who can eat it, but you know, the DHS, the color box. Have you seen this pedal? Oh my god, it's a replica. The circuit is a replica of a Neve console.
Hmm.
I love the thing. I love the thing. It is a little tinny, and maybe that's just that I don't know how to tweak it properly. But I'm a big fan of overdrive pedals and
Oh, you're
D8
talking about the
JHS.
JHS color box. Yeah.
Yeah, DHS, Department of Health and Homeland Security.
Homeland Security.
Yeah, Homeland Security makes a kick-ass stomp box.
JHS, American made pedals,
Yeah,
Oklahoma City.
there's Oklahoma City. DHS, JHS. Maybe they'll sponsor us. This show that is not released yet. But their Morning Glory pedal I've had for years, and it is sonically the best overdrive pedal I've ever had in my life. I'm a huge fan, and the last two records that I've recorded have been with the Morning Glory primarily. No, I also
Are you still playing through like an old Sears Magnavox amp?
I've got well, those are all I've got a Thunderbolt,
Uh-huh.
and and I forget which one of the manufacturers, but like it might have been I forget which one of the manufacturers made the same their exact same circuit. They copied for like these catalogs, like Sears and Roebuck wanted to
Right.
put out amps. So they'd use their circuit and then black label them for, whatever knockoff the catalog was pushing. So you can find a lot of amps from Sears or Woolworths or whatever, knockoff department store amp with a top notch circuit. And so, yeah, I've got a Bradford, which I think is I forget who made the circuit. I should know better. And I've got a little Alamo as well. It's a 4-watt amp, and it's never enough for any room that I've ever played in. But pegged, it sounds awesome to record it.
And there's no gain channel on either one, right?
It's volume, and you dime it basically. There is on the Bradford. There's I think a tremolo and a tone. Most of what I've played through recently, and by recently I mean the past 2 years, has been the Thunderbolt, which is a screamer.
I'm generally playing a lot of clean, shimmery, chimey, reverby, delay stuff. But then, so I got an amp that's solid state, a lot of wattage, pretty small speaker still, and it was so that I could have unlimited headroom basically and zero distortion. And then when I did get into any kind of drive, I'm like, well, can I get it out of a board? And I didn't get very far down that path, but since I'm also not playing with a lot of overdrive and I'm not really emphasizing that in much of the tone, it didn't matter that much. But the most interesting thing that I got into was realizing that the one of the fuzz face models, you can basically like control the drive off the tone on the volume knob on the guitar. So you're going to have nearly flat volume at the amp, but turning the knob up on the guitar is just going to change the amount of crunch you're getting. And so I didn't buy a fuzz face, but I found there was a Wampler pedal also made in America. I can't remember what it's called, maybe a Velvet Fuzz or something like that. And it was basically like two circuits in one. You kind of had like low on the fuzz, it sounded like a fuzz face. High on the fuzz, it sounded like a big muff or something like that, where it's just sort of not sounding that guitar-y anymore.
Yeah,
And so I ended up selling it because I just didn't use it very much. But the novelty of where is your power in the signal going and where does it go through the chain and what's the impact it has on the ultimate sound, it was all very fascinating to me as I take my manufacturing engineering. I'm not like, I don't have training in any of that stuff, but I've spent a lot of time just reading magazines about it and being sort of like, I wouldn't even say self-taught because I don't know how to manufacture stuff, but self-educated on a lot of engineering disciplines. So it's been a fascinating exploration to dig more and more into the circuit building and all that kind of stuff. I still feel like I know nothing, but that's okay.
well, it all comes down to what your I think at the end of the day, if you're just creating because you want to create, it comes down to what you're drawn to, and what's pleasing to you personally, and you at least for me, it was a process of working until I found things that helped me help me recreate that sound. And I mean, that's common sense. It's not like that's a novel concept, but
Are you still tone chasing, or do you feel like you have the tone now?
um I'm newly tone chasing because so I'm doing another record in November, um, in London of all places. But I'm doing another record in November, and I want it to sonically sound different on guitar. And I don't want it to have the same guitar-y vibe, because a lot of the stuff we've done over the years obviously is very guitar centric. And it will still be a guitar, bass, drums record primarily, but I want it to sound different. So I am in the process now of looking for, surprisingly, a clean tone, that's got just a little bit of overdrive sort of underneath, like a subtle overdrive sound. We'll see.
If you have a speaker box, I can ship you my amp to borrow and see if you like it. I don't use it very much.
Yeah, or I can just come to DC and
Either way, you can see the studio outside outside the frame.
yeah. Well, I know this. I'm drawn to color. Just I love color, and you've got color going on, and it makes me happy. I love and
We did these. So before I got on here, I went to the school, the elementary school, and helped the sixth graders, and they were doing silhouette paintings. So this variation, this was the tree specific silhouette sunset. Today's lesson was just the silhouette stage, or sorry, just the background stage of a sunset. They'll add the black silhouettes later, and the sixth graders get to pick things other than trees. The first graders just tear strips of black paper and glue them on to make trees.
yeah.
So yeah, that was my morning, was art class with color something.
Well, that's a heck of a way to spend a Friday for sure. And I
What are we
mean
up
that.
to today?
I got a few things to read. So we are finishing, or we've been talking all week, and I think it probably will be a bit of an ongoing conversation, but we've been talking about competency crises. Um, and there are a million different things that could be used to define a competency crisis. But for me, here are a few that resonate, and this can kind of get us into what we want to discuss. You've heard the concept. There was a book in, I think, 2017, maybe, called, I forget the name of the book, but it first introduced the concept, or the term, deaths of despair. And deaths of despair essentially mean, excess mortality due to drugs, um, liver, alcohol, cirrhosis, liver, alcohol slash liver deaths, and suicide or self harm. And those three deaths were labeled deaths of despair. And it's kind of taken hold as a metric. And not surprisingly, it's been, not reversing, shall we say, surprisingly. So just a few numbers to rattle off. In the year 2000, 22.7 deaths of despair per 100,000 people. Similar to 1970, where 21.5 per 100,000 people. By 2017, that more than doubled to 45.8 deaths of despair per 100,000 people. These are U.S. Congress, the Joint Economic Committee numbers. Then in 2021, and this is all races, all people, 209,225 Americans died from deaths of despair in 2021. I don't know the past 2 years' numbers, but my hunch is that trend has continued up. Um, that's point one. Point two, 1 in 10 Americans 1 in 10 Americans, 12 and older, take antidepressants. Both of these numbers are from the CDC. 13.2% of adults 18 and over take anxiety medications, and that's up from 10.6% the prior decade. Nothing inherently wrong with either one of those medications, but I think it's indicative of something. And then, the final thing for me is a final point. There are a million different ways, a million different metrics could be observed. But the final thing for me is real wages. And this is from Bureau of Labor Statistics. Over the past 5 years, real wages have been essentially flat. They fluctuate obviously quarter to quarter, but essentially flat for the past 5 years. The Economic Policy Institute, some say it's a left-leaning institute, whatever. But the Economic Policy Institute, between 1973 and 2013, productivity grew 74%, and hourly compensation only grew 9.2%. Now, I think some of that's explained by the emergence of digital. Technology, digital, I think that probably goes without saying, but still. And then the final metric related to that is a Pew Research metric that the 2018 was the last year I could find data for. Not that I looked all that hard, but 2018 purchasing power, real wages, were the same as 1978. So I think all those things in context. Again, this is not. Who are we to have definitive answers on anything? But I think all of those things in context, I don't think you can look at those metrics and say that we don't have a competency crisis across the board, not just in policy issues, but across the board. I think if you use those metrics as metrics of purpose and meaning and well-being, which what else is there? I mean, I don't think we want to measure society on the number of food delivery apps that we have. So I think by any narrative, I think we have a competency crisis.
It's the combination of the numbers, right? So there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. But when you have a set of different corroborating pieces of evidence, they're not coming from the same source, they're not using the exact same metric, they are all indicating trend, basically.
Yeah, and I think I think for me the challenge or the objective, the mission, and not just in our discussion here, but the mission is to have perspective. And it's easy to say that folks are, and this is the externalist's point of view. I feel like it's easy to say that folks are at the whim, or are victims, or we are, folks have no say in these outcomes. And I do believe, we've talked about it all week, and I've, probably been a little too aggressive a time or two in stating the case that I think the competency crisis extends up the educational ladder. It extends up the socioeconomic ladder and the elected apparatchik ladder. I think the folks above are driving the incompetency crisis. But I also think, and this is the point for today, I also think that we're all responsible as well for ourselves. That there's a trend, and there's no way to measure this, but there's a trend away from self-reliance, away from individualism, and to the external, the next election, the next candidate. Candidate X is the savior. This is the person, this is the most important. I've heard every single election that this election is the most important election of my lifetime, of all of our lifetimes. And I think people are looking externally for solutions that, yes, institutions and places have failed. There are incompetencies woven through society, but also we have the answer to a lot of these solutions internally. And I think that responsibility is on us as a community and us collectively to foster that and cultivate that again.
So I think I'm more collectivist than you on this point. So I think that I think that the extent to which any individual controls their circumstances is pretty limited. I think that they, everybody can mostly control their, outlook, right? But outlook is not sufficient to entirely control your circumstances. So, and then you have things like, what leads to happiness or a stable mood or something like that. And I need to go back and find some actual science on this, but the stuff I've read basically says, it's 50% genetics, like you're going to be as happy as your parents are. Then it's maybe 25% circumstances, right? So all other things being equal, if they had a good job and you had a good job, you'll be just as happy as they are. If they had bad jobs and you have better jobs, you'll be happier than they were. And then the other 25%, the last 25% is, outlook and mentality. So you do have like you have control over what your attitude is. You hear like this is a funny one to me. I see this sometimes. It doesn't cost anything to be nice. Have you heard this before? Right. Okay. So let me posit that if you are inherently an impulsive grouch, say you're Oscar the Grouch, as a hypothetical grouch, it does cost you something to be nice because it requires you to exhibit and exert a certain degree of self-awareness and self-control that imparts, and it's an immediate pain that you have foregone, meaning it was painful for you to dig deep and be nice. Whereas for Oscar the Grouch, like that's hard. If you're Big Bird, you are naturally less inclined to be a grouch, and therefore it's less of a cost to you to be nice. So I'm saying that if it, similarly, like if you have control of your attitude, there's only so far that control of your attitude is going to take you. And so things like, you know, social institutions that emphasize the good of those around you, or social institutions that emphasize the importance of what you've contributed to society and the person next to you, or even rules or religious beliefs that mean that you should be doing unto others, and these types of things, right? So those things are very, very focused on the social self, and they're much less focused on the individual self. I mean, obviously you can have both of these things be true at the same time, right? Like you have agency over how you act, but also like your ability to contribute to the cosmos is extraordinarily limited, right? And being able to carry both things at once has been most of where I end up in my own head.
So you mentioned one of the four superpowers, and there are four human superpowers, and I think we have divergent opinions on this.
Probably.
Yeah. Self-awareness is a human superpower.
Can I guess the other three?
I'd love for it. Yeah, go ahead.
Self-awareness, self-control.
There's a broader term. There's a
Oh,
broader indication of self-control.
what's that?
Discipline.
Okay, discipline.
Physical discipline. So the discipline to take care of oneself and his or her health. Emotional discipline.
Uh-huh.
And
That's still self-control, yeah.
yeah, but it's a different animal. I know a bunch of people physically disciplined with no emotional discipline. I,
Well, sure, yeah.
I think both are equally important. In fact, crucial. And then the fourth one, and this is the one, and I have a point about this, but I think intellectual curiosity is the fourth human superpower. So self-awareness, physical discipline, emotional discipline, and intellectual curiosity. I think a person, and we drive the bus on those four things.
Do I need to go find more intellectually non-curious people? Have I self-selected so far into only spending time with people that are intellectually curious that I now have no perspective on what the lack of intellectual curiosity would do?
You're clearly in a bubble if you don't know non-intellectually curious people. That
I
is
mean, I must,
that's
but
the preponderance of everybody wandering around. And I don't mean that as a cut. I think social media plays a part in that. I think it's just by design. I think I don't know that as a society we're selecting for intellectual curiosity. I think we're selecting for productive employees, and maybe want just a right amount. And maybe I'm overthinking the engineering capabilities we have as a society. But regardless, intellectual curiosity, without a doubt, a superpower, a human superpower.
is there any downside to it? Like, if you spend your time being intellectually curious, are you going to get are you going to be head in the cloudsy? Is there some flip side to intellectual curiosity, or is it pure gain?
I think the flip side is, and I mean this, I think the flip side is strained, a challenging professional career. I think, and
Yeah, I could see that.
unless you're in, and there, this is, we talked about the competency crisis with academia. Um, I think there's a tightening box of intellectual rigor. There's a lot of replication, but I think there's a tightening box of intellectual rigor in academia that's a competency crisis. I think intellectual curiosity is going to cause you challenges. You have to have the mental and emotional discipline, to the tact, the self awareness to navigate those situations. Because I think curious people tend to ask a lot of questions, and you don't take things at face value. And that a lot of times doesn't work out too well in a professional setting.
I've known and mostly worked with several people who didn't go to college or didn't finish college, and then had other people identify that high school graduate as somebody who just wants to do research but wants nothing to do with any with any academic institutions. And that seems like it would be a curse of intellectual curiosity. That's kind of to what you're talking about.
But I think that's the number one trait. And we talked about this earlier this week. I think that's the number one trait of tinkerers, is just, how does this work? Why does it work that way? I don't accept that this is the way. I don't care who said for forever that this is the way that things should work. It's not how I think. I see it differently, or I want to confirm for myself that that's the case. And that's intellectual curiosity. Like, I think the other aspect of that grouping of superpowers is, and I know this with myself, and there's a risk of sounding a way that I don't intend it, but I think people will relate to this. I think I read books. I read a lot of books. I've read all the, we can, the people who use that as a litmus test get on my nerves, but I've read a lot of books. Okay. Um, I read as often as I have time to read. I don't read books to form my worldview. My worldview comes from me. I am my filter. Now, a lot of things contribute to that. And I love to read for one reason, like, where do I have blind spots, or where do I have gaps in my logical reasoning, or where have I missed things that are either contrary? I like to change. I love to change tightly held beliefs. That's a superpower too. God, that's the fifth superpower, the ability to change personally held belief based on new information. But that's why I like to read. What have I missed? Where are there gaps? Where are there things that, in my worldview and my filter of how I go through life, where have I missed things that would be advantageous for me to consider? And I don't think people think in those terms. I know they don't. Even smart people, educated people. And that's the when we spoke about academic competency crises this week, that's the disturbing thing for me, is I know so many PhDs. I've hired them. I've worked with them. I know so many PhDs not intellectually curious at all. At all. Just, good at research, good
Did they
at
go did they go straight through?
I think a quality manager can extract talent from anybody as long
Yeah.
as that person isn't toxic. Like if you have a toxic personality, then they're probably in senior leadership and not somebody you're going to hire. But
I would get a PhD, but I don't think I would do I think I would do it. And so the circumstances are so specific, right? Because I know that that will take me bare minimum 3 years of not doing something else.
well,
So I
what question would you want to be answering?
I don't know.
Because you don't. I've known you for a few years now. You don't strike me as a several years actually. I thought about that the other
It's
day.
been a long
It's
time.
been several years.
Like almost a decade probably.
It is. It
Yeah.
has. Like 2016, maybe 2000, something like that.
Sometime after 2014, but I don't know exactly when.
Yeah. Anyway, you don't strike me as the type of guy that would want to do a PhD just to do a PhD.
No. I would so it would be I would have to be imagining the plate of options of what I could be spending most of my day on. And the thing that most let me do what I wanted to was a PhD.
Do you
And then that would be what I picked.
do you find it interesting that you were in your studies, your undergraduate studies were more esoteric? And that's a big umbrella, but that you found your way and your sort of raison d'etre, you found your way to technology and math and science and are very good at it. Like, do
Do you
you?
remember so you remember my circle?
I do.
Okay, so overwhelmingly once you hit mid-career stride, you see a huge like falling out of um all of the humanities and soft science majors who are technically minded and good communicators and curious and good writers and able to take things apart and doing woodwork on the side or like whatever the case may be. You see those people who hadn't been particularly noticeable through their 20s suddenly come back around and be you know partner to a technical founder or uh you know software product manager or all kinds of different roles where a deep understanding of how a lot of pieces of a thing works becomes more important than a very very specific understanding of how one part of the thing works. And so all of the skills that engineering education trains up, and to some degree like math and science education as well, it tends to be about depth, right? So it's how well can I solve a particular specific thing, because to your point about slotting people into careers, like when you need technicians and you need engineering practitioners to come out of school, they need to go work at these companies and build these parts of airplanes and build these parts of cars and build these parts of the factories that make cars. And the management class, the capital owner class, the everybody else can always take a a class or a cadre of engineers who have deep knowledge and then shuffle them around like this. But only a subset of those engineers were ever going to be able to make it to the point where they were doing lots of nonlinear thinking across domains. And the amount of frustration that, I'll just pick a number, 32-year-old engineers run into when they think, I'm not getting paid enough. The real way to get money is to be in finance. Oh, that's it's the closer you are to the money, that's the more you get to see your real worth. Marketing doesn't know anything about anything. I'm the only person who's smart. Nobody else is smart. That whole like mentality really kicks up as the number of paths that an engineer or a software developer, I'll use those two more or less interchangeably, uh, those two careers both come to a crossroads where you can either become phenomenally good at your thing or you can grudgingly become a manager. And by the time you're grudgingly becoming a manager, now you have people who had a massive disadvantage in earning potential and technical skills and maybe computer skills, up until the time you were 25 or 28 or something like that. But now they've been compensating and figuring out another way to get there for the last decade and a half. And now, brilliant engineer when you're 21 is competing with some random English major, and the frustration level from the engineer about even having to be in the same conversation as this effing idiot who doesn't know how to spin up a server of this thing or that thing or whatever. It's like a huge wall in front of the technician's face, and you see people like bang their heads against that for all of their 30s and 40s very routinely. So I like, by the time I hit 35, I had a huge advantage, and it was back to level playing field, because the stuff that needed to get done at the mid level in engineering functions didn't require me to know how to write code or build a CAD model. It required other stuff.
The other aspect of that whole scenario that you just mentioned are really bright engineers from top institutions getting hired at Fang or
Hmm.
one of the big technology companies, and then A/B testing some little bullshit piece of software. Like their work is reduced down to some
Yeah.
remedial. Like it's not like they're building a system
I have a great example of this, a really specific example. So, a super bright material scientist I knew uh, went to work on the F-18, right? So this is a platform that is recognizable to anybody who's been to an air show. It's a famous, cool airplane. Well, I'm not as much now, but at the time it was much more cool. This was pre F-35 and maybe even pre F-22. So anyway, they go, material scientists. They did either a master's or a PhD on crack propagation through different materials, and they're like, I'm super pumped to go work on this well-known airframe. And then it was year after year of deciding inside a 4-inch window, not a literal window, inside a 4-inch space, does the bolt need to be here? Or does the bolt need to be here? Or does the bolt need to be here? And how much is that saving in stress reduction or materials cost or faster throughput? And it becomes generic box engineering that is utterly soul crushing and disinteresting.
yeah.
They ended up a real estate agent.
I mean, there are, and I think this is in line with what we're talking about. There are multiple paths for an intellectually curious, disciplined, self aware person. And it kind of doesn't matter what you've studied.
Well, everybody stops asking. So I generally don't talk about my background very much unless asked. Given the choice of talking about my background to introduce myself and start
Is
listing
there
out
anything
letters.
is I am the most I'm very sure of myself. Is there anything worse on the face of the earth than the go around and tell us a little bit about yourself? I hate that. Like I can't stand that.
I got used to it for a while, but I would say but that's because I worked at the same company for almost a decade and a half,
Yeah.
so it made it very easy to just say, I have prestigious title X, I've worked on this thing and that thing, but I would say very little. I would just say it would be like title to indicate tenure, project name to indicate general domain where I was, and then like that was it. That's all I needed to say. Now working for myself, basically, I would never bother to introduce anything backward looking. I would just say, I'm Russ and I'm working on a podcast with Terry, or I'm Russ and I'm working on, uh, you know, building some software, or I'm Russ and I'm working on some automation projects. And first of all, almost no one cares anyway. They only care about whatever the next thing that's coming out of your mouth and if it's interesting. So, if it's somebody that wants to talk about building instruments, then we'll talk about building instruments. If it's somebody that actually cares about, domain specific vocabulary standardized in universal markup language, then we'll talk about that, right? And I'll be excited that you care, but I also won't be disappointed if you don't care about that particular thing, and I'll pick something else. You want to talk about gardening, we'll talk about gardening. You want to talk about turf, we'll talk about turf. Like, let's meet in the middle here. So I think that I think yeah, the looking backward at this was the thing, these are the things that I did, and therefore that's where my expertise comes from, is kind of a missed opportunity. Because if you just launch into something that is simple, articulate, useful, and topical to your audience, whether it's an audience of your spouse or your kids or a dinner party or your neighbors or a room full of people that came to see you speak, all of those, they just want to know, like, tell me something interesting now, and they'll figure out from there, like, how you got there. They don't, like, telling them how you got there is not relevant if it turns out that they've got the best credentialed idiot in the room.
I've found that pretty much in any instance, especially, the more senior you get, the best tip for communicating, and I don't adhere to it here, but the best tip for communication, without a doubt, is to be able to convey what you're trying to say in as few words as possible. Like, I'm conscious of, especially when speaking with very senior people, executives, I'm conscious of the length of my sentences. I want to say as few words as possible, but speak clearly, and the meaning that I'm trying to convey. You gotta distill down some high level technical content into as few words as possible.
I love being in the middle of that chain where when you talk to an executive, you can see them losing interest over time, and like, you can watch it falling off a
Okay,
cliff.
but that's self-awareness, my man. That's a superpower. I,
Well,
I see all the time people just
go ahead, just charge
the
ahead.
just the ramble, the horse gets out of the barn and it's just gone,
Well,
and
here,
they go
there's the second side of this, which is junior person or person who has less practice speaking to
for sure.
executives starts talking to me, and all I can think is this the point? Is this the point? Is this the point? Is this the point? Are we at the point? I don't think this is the point. This is repetitive. This is probably the same thing. Tidbit of value. This is not the point. Interesting question, Mark. Let's circle back to that. Take breath. I literally can, and this is not me, this is universal. Like, once I get to that thing where I have a question about that piece of whatever it was you were telling me, maybe it was a budget thing, maybe it was a number of hours thing, maybe it was the answer to a question I asked you, maybe it was the answer to a question I didn't realize I had yet. If the words keep coming from the other side and I've got that thing in my mind, only thing on my mind is,
The
how do I get
words.
that question
Yeah.
answered?
So I am, having built and led teams, I'm conscious of that dynamic.
Yeah, of course.
I'm leader guy. I've never been that guy. It's part of my personality. Very clearly am, but that I don't view it that way. A lot of people get off on that, but I've had a lot of instances where I've brought folks onto calls with very senior people, and because I want them to explain this thing that they've done, because they need, everybody needs to be
Yeah.
recognized for this thing that they've done. But in coaching sessions before, I'll be like, look, and I can't stress this enough, please say as few words as possible. Like,
Yeah.
practice, do whatever you have to do. You're only going to help yourself if you do this. Like, say as few words as possible to get across the intent of what you're trying to say. And it,
I
and
mean,
it
I assume someone coached you to do that, so it's just passing it on
no
to.
one coached me to do that. I read the effing room. I've seen, I've seen just, okay, how do these people communicate? And it's quick hitters. But I've also seen the interruption comes at senior levels. They give you a couple sentences and the interruption comes, and they
Right.
they do what you said you don't do, which is, this is the question that's on my mind. I'm going to ask this question. The interruption comes.
I
And
mean, I tend to cut people off and then be like, "What about this thing?"
so I've had to do that a few times too, and I hate it. Like, someone on my team is presenting to someone above us, and they're just the bronco is bucking wildly in the pasture, and I'll jump in, and
Have you read about the Amazon meeting style with the story
I
meetings?
love it. I love it. I hate PowerPoint's the worst thing ever. By the way, I love it.
Completely disagree with that.
Oh, because you make good slides.
You're not wrong.
You're a graphic designer, and you like to see your work.
It's just
I will
another
say
avenue.
this, when we did, can I say the manufacturer? You and I did a joint presentation a long time ago.
I don't think we can say the customer.
We won't say the customer, but we did a joint presentation at a major manufacturer, automotive manufacturer.
Yeah.
Best slide deck I've ever seen in my life. And like, stupid simple, incredibly simple. I was impressed.
I will say I don't remember what was in that deck.
Stick figures.
I remember that it went really well. Like the whole thing went really, really
Do
well.
you understand how senior some of those engineering folks were?
I mean, I do understand it, and understood it then, and I didn't care.
I didn't either, but because
Like
I was around them a lot.
yeah. Well, so that was the other thing is from a I don't know. It was just sort of like it doesn't being respectful of someone's time means if it's a large room, you prepare appropriately. If it's a customer meeting or a client meeting or a project meeting as opposed to a conference, you do it differently when you have people that are trying to solve an explicit problem, because the overwhelming majority of the time spent on that is going to be, we have a problem to solve or a set of problems or a complex problem, but they're not there to get general knowledge and background. They're not going to stand up and stand in line at a microphone and ask you a question that's in the form of a statement. Like that stuff's not going to happen. And they're not there to see you as an entertainment or infotainment. They're there to get a
Value.
briefing.
Yeah.
And if you don't just tell them the stuff, the thing that I've practiced public speaking and been relatively good at it for as long as I can remember. And I think that the thing that strikes people that struggle with public speaking is they don't understand that when someone speaks smoothly, that wasn't natural, and that it was a matter of practice and preparation and intent on one hand, and then on the other hand of it is, once you know stuff, it doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't matter how much it is. Once you just know the stuff, then you don't have to worry about whether you're going to say something wrong. You can only worry about, am I loud enough to hear? Am I speaking the right, speed?
Do you have imposter syndrome?
Me?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes, but I didn't there. I remember I was in 7th grade and we had to it was kind of a weird setup for my 7th grade year, which was smart because middle schoolers man, or something else. So we had like very teamish type setting. So we would go to like the assembly in our large open room probably like 4 times a day or something like this. So this was the equivalent of maybe like 4 to 6 homeroom classes all in one big area. And 5 or 6 teachers were sort of like collectively teaching this group. So we had like, this is the time when you go to assembly, then you split up to your classes, have your normal schedule, come back to assembly at lunchtime, blah, blah, blah. So at assembly time, it was like, you're going to have to give a presentation, and you could talk about anything you wanted. You had a certain amount of time. The exercise was in, this is how you give a presentation. And my parents probably suggested this. I don't think I came up with this idea on my own. They're like, you should explain how to change a flat tire on a bike. And I'm like, why would I do that? And they're like, because you already know how to do it. And I'm like, well, I guess that's true. And I remember nothing about the presentation other than it just it wasn't hard, because all I had to do was do the thing I already knew how to do while talking through what my hands were doing. And that was it. But if I had picked something that was fresh to me, or there was a reach, or that I hadn't done a bunch of times, then it would have been a real pain in the neck and I would have really struggled. So almost anybody can go talk about a thing that they know well
Yeah.
and have a much, much easier time of it than if they're, I don't know, trying to sound smart. Don't bother trying to sound smart. Just talk about the thing you already know. And then you can practice it in the mirror, hear yourself speak, and then like you'll understand, oh well, that didn't sound very good to me. But I already know it. So why didn't it sound good? I know it should sound good. And you can focus on the presentation versus the meat,
Yeah.
which like that's a different topic about if you have nothing to say, maybe don't speak.
Oh, hands down, and that's. I think that comes back to self awareness. That's something I live by, like in business, in work, and whatever. If I'm in my lane, if it's an opinion oriented esoteric conversation, then yeah, I'll offer opinions. But if there's a conversation about the specific course of something that's outside of my domain expertise, I don't talk. I don't say anything. I'll ask questions just because I like to know things, but I don't. I don't. I think there's a again. I think that's why it's a superpower. Self awareness is there are times if the subject matter is not what I know, where I know it's best to just shut up.
There's another good quotable that'll tie two of Terry's superpowers together. So it's the what is it? If you're the smartest person in the room, you're
Yeah,
probably in the wrong room.
yeah,
That's a blending of self awareness and intellectual curiosity
yeah.
together.
Well, and I've found the past few years, like I really want to find a mentor. I really want to
Oh my
find.
god.
I'm serious. Like
No, it's hard. Go ahead though.
yeah, like I really want to find a mentor. I don't. I can't saddle up to stock guy. Like that whole world, we need it. I'm glad those people exist, but like finance and stock guy is not my that's not my world. At least I haven't met the right person, maybe. But I need a mentor, like
You know,
someone who's built a business, and I think I might be meeting this person next week. But someone who's built a business, understands technology, also appreciates art and culture, and or just maybe not even that. Like, I'm not trying to make a friend necessarily, but a mentor. And I've really had a strong push for a while now to find someone. I love being around people who have experiences that I don't have that I can learn from. Um, yeah. So
I think there's value to somebody who's not family or friend
for sure.
or service provider, right? Like people get a shrink because it's not your spouse and not your, people go to the preacher because it's not your
Okay.
spouse.
So and we don't have a lot of time. You mentioned shrink on the topic of the externalization of everything. And I'm sorry, you get to hear all my harebrained theories. I
So
think,
before you get this last one out,
sure.
is there is there a definitive uh citable source where Terry's human superpowers have been documented?
This is Terry's. This is Terry's.
Like it's not in a Clyde album liner notes somewhere.
It's not.
All right.
Yeah, it's not. Um, but I think maybe that should be in the show note or whatever.
Let's get you an essay. You need a long form
Will you
we'll,
write
we'll
it?
I'll ghostwrite it. Yeah.
All right, you ghostwrite it, and I'll edit it.
The transcript here is generated automatically. So it's actually fairly straightforward for me to take just you speaking and me turning it into an essay and then putting your name on it. That's fairly easy to do. So anyway, I didn't mean to change the subject. I just need to make sure that there wasn't already a citation that I can include. So tell me about shrinks.
No, not only is there not a citation from me, I haven't heard anyone put that together. It's been my superpower. I know that those four things, and I think
And sometimes five.
always five. Yeah,
It was four when we
it's
started.
now five. It is
Okay.
now five, and I
Okay.
forget what was the fifth.
I don't know. Luckily, this is being recorded. Tell me about shrinks. I need to know where this is going.
Again, this is I'm not one of those people to make blanket statements and throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater. I think retail therapy has done more to affect the externalization of everything, and ergo some aspect of competency crises in this country, retail therapy, because it by default, and I've seen it firsthand with my son, by default, whether it's well intended or what. And I think there are a lot of cases in trauma where it's crucial. I'm not, again, it's not an across the board statement, but I think a lot of people where they would have had these conversations with friends or confidants or priests or, ministers or someone in their local community are now having them with retail therapy. And I think retail therapy at its core is relieving people or externalizing, absolving them from individual responsibility. Not across the board. I think I have some challenges with retail therapy. I think it's I challenge the qualification of people doing it. I think it's not a rigorous, and this is not a group to get angry at you because there are a lot of them. But it's, the barrier to entry for retail therapists is not a rigorous process.
I think
Um,
by calling it retail therapy, you avoid
of the true
most
science, yeah.
you manage to avoid most criticism, because anyone who comes at you for criticizing retail therapy, in order to be upset with you about insulting them, they have to acknowledge that they are practicing retail therapy.
This is true.
So you're pretty well shielded here.
I don't think so. I think, once this hits the 3 or 4 people who might hear this in the next little bit, they might be angry.
Do you consider the self help industry part of retail therapy, or is that separate?
Yeah, I mean, so there's individual improvement, and I think that's a product of intellectual curiosity. Like I do this all the time, and that's, again, this is Krishnamurti is Jiddu Krishnamurti is an Eastern philosopher. He's a guru. He's a Hindu practitioner, but his writings have been very influential on me. Although it's still my worldview, it's the concept of um, we are to continually observe what we do without judging. So I always want to know, why do I do what I do? Why am I doing this? And if I'm continually butting up against the same obstacle, that's a me thing. What is it? I just want to see that I keep, why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep encountering this? And, he posits that just by observing without judging, you clear these things out of your space. And I can attest to that to some degree. So for me, self-help is self-awareness and intellectual curiosity and a constant process of taking inventory of why I do what I do.
I think that it's very easy, whether it's retail or any other therapy, or self help books. You can go through the motions and show up and assume that that's going to be enough,
Such a good point.
and end up perpetually frustrated by the outcomes, and perpetually externalizing the outcomes, meaning you assume that it's not you, it's the therapist, or if I just get a little more therapy,
It's
it'll
the
be fixed.
job, it's the spouse, it's the next election, it's this racial group, it's that country. It's always something other than you. And this has been a breakthrough thing with my son, is really coaching him on that. Like, you're driving your bus, man. Like, you are at the wheel of your bus.
Isn't he under 25?
He's 21.
I mean, I feel like you could write the you could write an epic novel and call it uh 21, the externalizing story.
Your point is a great one, though. The point that you just made is a great one. All of that leads to the externalization of everything. It's a pseudoscientific approach to treating what may or may not be problems that are just outside of, most of the things that people encounter are discomfort with the normal functioning of life. Like
Right.
we're flawed animals in a system that moves to entropy. Like it's an entropic environment.
Right.
It's not going to be easy, regardless of how many food delivery apps there are or how many shows you can stream on
You
Netflix.
hate food delivery apps.
It is like, it is for me, it's the bellwether issue of the competency crisis in technology. Who's throwing money after a new delivery app? How many of them are there? Or a new, dating app? Or like, do something else. Do something else.
I think that is valid, if perhaps obvious and maybe even shallow criticism coming from you. Let's write the essay. Let's focus on that.
Yeah, don't take what might be a marginally thoughtful, introspective concept of the 5 human superpowers and dumb it down with a really, really, really generic and observation that a lot of other people have made
I
too.
think anytime you hear me say the words "Terry's got a bone to pick," what goes through that filter as you hear those words should be, did we write the seminal paper on Terry's 5 superpowers yet? Because if not, why are we talking about the bones Terry has to pick? Put those bones in a
Yeah.
box and punt them out the window, because they don't matter until you got that seminal paper.
Yeah, that's true.
I
I
will. Am I? So I'm giving a presentation next week in Atlanta, and we'll try and tape one of these from the road. And am I? This is a very brief rant. Am I the only one who gives a crap about actual definitive citations? It's like there's definitions of stuff that are mostly technical terms, and like the baseline here needs to be. It doesn't need to be like, if I need a definition, I need to go find the thing that is the citation of the thing. And like, I don't want to pick on specific terms at the moment, but like, if there's not a definitive citation for a definition of AI, why are we even talking about what AI is? If there's not a definitive, citation to what a robot is, if like the Robotics Industry Association or somebody else doesn't have a workable description, why are we even talking about it? And if the Robotics Industry Association's definition of a robot differs dramatically from Isaac Asimov's, just name which one you're citing, and then all of like, we'll have a 75% shorter conversation, because we can just refer to a citation rather than assume that we are the smartest person that has ever walked and the first one to come with this idea.
Well, it
It was
leaves.
digital twin, by the way. That was the thing that was driving me
Oh,
bananas.
don't get me started on digital twin.
Do you want to know what? So what happened here is I was
Okay,
I was
bigger.
substituted. Listen to this. This is funny. So I was substituted as a presenter, and the title already had digital twin in it. So then I'm like, well, okay, I guess I have to talk about that. But I'm the substitute,
Big.
and I don't think there's any earth on which I would voluntarily say, "Hey, let me start this." So it's been a good process, because I'm like, let me take my skeptical point of view here, and let me try and basically just argue the other side. Like, let me get the best possible argument around this topic that
So where do you
I
come
just
down?
want to put a freaking nail through my face over.
Where do you come down? Because okay, my question to you was going to be, what's the bigger fraud, the industrial metaverse or a digital twin?
Industrial metaverse. But that's like picking on there's only what, 2 companies that are now really aggressively pursuing it.
The one blows my mind. Blows my mind. It's not Bob's Industrial Company.
Yeah, I know. So the industrial metaverse is a bigger fraud because there isn't one. The digital twin isn't a fraud per se. It's more like
A lot of semantical liberties taken with digital twin.
and so in searching for a definitive citation, I found a pretty good one, and it's perfectly broad. It's very widely cited, and it perfectly captures. If I were to, it's one of these things where in a room full of people that have been working in software simulation manufacturing and in an industry, you can say the thing about digital twin is everybody's got a different definition, but you can also say, is there anybody in here who doesn't feel comfortable with this notion of what a digital twin is? Because I don't feel any obligation to define it. I feel an obligation to say, you may all have slight variations of definition, but when I talk about this subject, you're pretty much going to know what I mean. And the variation between your definition and your definition is not going to matter that
What
much.
is your
So
definition?
I don't have one. I'm just citing to this other one.
Well, what is this? The
I'll
one
tell
that
you
you're
next
saying?
week. I'll tell you next week after the speech.
What day is your speech?
It's Monday.
Yeah, we need a debrief on that.
All right.
Yeah.
I have to check with the powers that be. I think I'm allowed. I think the conference organizers would probably prefer that I talk about the speech as much as possible and name the conference.
Can you
Which
name the
I'm not
conference
going to do
here?
yet. No, I'm not going to do it yet. I'll do it next week.
Yeah, when
Once it's over.
yeah, when there's no possibility that anyone can show up. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't just because I have a bad tendency just because I haven't seen a use case for something. I call it like an actual use case and applied an instance where this thing that somebody's selling is being bought and used. Not a test bed that's being given to them. There's a lot of that.
I think I have a couple.
Of a digital twin.
It's pretty close. I have enough that I'm going to stand on a stage and say, these are the closest I see to commercialized versions of this.
Okay, so is it a simulation software where you can simulate flow or a motor's performance, or is it the factory digital twin that?
Well, so, and this is why clearing the air at the beginning and saying the definitional arguments don't actually matter. And then then the rest of the conversation can be, we're talking about simulation. Like
It's a simulation. It's exactly right.
it's a continuation of all of the modeling and simulation discussion that we've already been having for 30 years. And whether it's a twin or not a twin is not an argument that I'm going to get into.
So can you, like, I love to think about talking about competency crises.
Yeah.
And I mean this wholeheartedly. I like to punch up, by the way, if you haven't noticed. I love to think about the amount of cash just lit on fire chasing a digital twin. I love it. The marketing dollars, the number of salespeople that have taken in a box of donuts to have a talk about a digital twin, the number of lunch and learns. Panera Bread has made so much money off of digital twins.
Panera Bread is the real winner. They're out here selling pickaxes.
Gold Rush. Yeah, I love to think about that. The amount of, and same thing with AI or predictive maintenance is the next thing. I just love to think about the amount of lunch and learn dollars spent on predictive maintenance, or the amount of lunch and learn dollars spent on digital twin. Just cash, just lit, burned, exploded.
I don't know if somebody would have paid for me to fly to Atlanta and talk for an hour if it didn't have digital twin in the name. Think about that.
Are there?
Am I the dollar lighter?
No, you're a dude earning a check.
I will say that if I was asked to give if this was a specifically paid by the organizers event rather than just my travel being covered, I would not give a speech about digital twin for money. Like, you could offer me $15,000 for a 30-minute speech. I would not give you a digital twin speech because you wouldn't get your money's worth. It's impossible for you to get.
Who
that
would
much
you
value
get your
that.
money's worth from a digital twin speech? A senior software engineer from Microsoft?
No, not even them. I don't know. No.
From I just think about, I'm serious. Like, I think about just the things that I've seen behind the curtains from a platform perspective, the marketing, the dollars spent on things that just cash lit on fire, and it continues. It continues unabated.
I think that's just the natural inefficiencies of the system.
I think it's the crises of incompetence.
I think you should ponder over the weekend as to what cache are you lighting on fire today. When in a world full of cache bonfires, be a fire extinguisher.
Oh, it's all these lights on in this room. I think that's probably electric bill cash being lit on fire.
All right, I gotta go. Next thing.
Have a great weekend, man.
Bye, Terry.
Talk